Well, the only reason I can think of is that there is a plan in the leadership of the deep state of NATO to go to a war against Russia. That's the only explanation. Why would you try to weaponize the populace of a major country bordering Russia to a war against Russia? I don't see any other point than there is an aim to bring upon a war with NATO and Russia, and we would of course be on the forefront.
Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today we're going to do an update on Finland. I've got with me again Professor Tuomas Malinen, an Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Helsinki and the CEO and Chief Economist of GNS Economics, a macroeconomic consultancy firm. Tuomas recently wrote a highly informative but also very worrisome thread on Twitter X about the frightening level of pro-war propaganda on Finnish media, especially newspaper pieces that seem to aim at massaging in the idea that Finland must get ready to fight, again, a war with Russia. Scary times, but Tuomas, welcome.
Thank you. Scary times, but nice to be here. Again.
Well, happy to talk to you because you're actually writing a lot on Twitter, also just observing Finnish media, and for us non-Finnish speakers that's very valuable. You do that in English, and you actually just showed in a thread, I think 13 or so tweets it was, how many newspapers are now kind of talking about the likelihood or inevitability or necessity of war with Russia and what to do in case of war, where to shelter, what about the bunkers. I mean, the whole media space seems now to be taken up by discussions about what not if but what when war happens. And can you maybe explain a bit more of what it is like in Finland at the moment?
Yeah, it's strange. I would describe it as grooming of the Finnish populace to the inevitability of a war against Russia. It's really one of the strangest things. The thread, actually, there were two parts in the thread. First was about this war propaganda that's being spewed upon us, and the second was on the defamation campaigns run by the mainstream media against me. And yeah, we can talk on those a bit later. But it's been like, I've been in Finland for 48 years now, with only exception of 6 months spent in New York City while studying in NYU. And I honestly, I have to say that I have never seen Finland the way it is now. And people are being fed, there's really no other way to put it but lies on different angles. So we started with the lie on the recovery fund of the European Union in 2019, 2020 actually, and 2021. Then we went to the corona lockdowns, and then we have been under a relentless war propaganda since February 22. And what we have seen after Finland was ascended as a full member of NATO in the 4th of April, 9th of April, forgot the day, in 23, we have seen a kind of acceleration in the war propaganda. And during this fall, maybe beginning in the summer, we have seen articles of actual guidelines, articles presenting guidelines for actual preparation for war for individual citizens. This includes like how to seek shelter in an air raid. Well, the air raid was not explicitly said, but what would be the other reason to seek shelter? You know, and the other one was or the other angle has been that where to go when the war starts, where Finns will be transferred from Helsinki, for example, and where you could seek shelter already now. And I have a friend, they own a big farm outside Helsinki, and it was, I think it was October or something like that. His mom, who is over 90 years old, and she remembers the actual two wars with Russia, and she kind of gave an order to clean their outhouses so that refugees from Helsinki could come to live with them again. It was chilling stuff, because she's, of course, she's old, but she's still rather sharp, and she does see the same line of progress that led to the war in 39 and again in 41. So the problem we have here, basically, we just talked about this like during Christmas, that most of the people who have seen the war or the wars have passed away, or they're in no shape to comment. So they're gone. And that memory of the horrors of the war is going away. And now we are being fed the idea that we should go to a war against Russia. So that's, yeah, a lengthy primer.
No. I mean, this is, I was I am very worried about this, because getting the population ready, on the one hand, the young men to willingly pick up the guns, that's one. And on the other hand, the general population to accept the matter of the fact that, well, now we're at war. I mean, we knew it would come and now it's here, so we have to go through it. That's the other one, because war is also needs a lot of political support. It needs buy-in from the population. And it seems to me that Finland is being ready to do the buy-in. But it helped me, and you alluded also to Corona, but it seems to me that something is happening here again as on a spin, which is like acceding to NATO was supposed to make Finland safe and save it from war. How is it that the same newspapers that must have talked about how safe Finland will be from war inside NATO are now able to argue that we have to get ready for war? How does that happen? Because that's the entire premise of NATO accession, that now you're going to be safe. Because you were neutral, and neutrality is not safe. What happened?
Yeah. Well, it was done slowly, step by step. It's just how they spin these things, and this is like the Nazis did in the 1930s, for example, when they spin stuff. It's the same kind of propagandic doctrine. So you just change it bit by bit. But of course, Finns are not stupid. So many of my friends are asking the same question: that we were promised that NATO would make us safe. And what was like, we didn't get the vote whether we want to go to NATO or anything. There was just a few gallops. And there was like, my American friend asked me at the time that how can you join an alliance in a war? I was like, a good question. And so the Finnish general population, we have been fed lies after lies after lies since basically the recovery fund. And the lie during the ascension as a full member of NATO was that there is no war. NATO is not in a war. And even though it was clear at that point that there is like, NATO is providing equipment to Ukraine, they were denying it here. So deny, and then suddenly it's just they released information in bits, like in small steps. Oh no, okay, actually this happened. It's something I don't know who has envisaged it. It's a mind control technique of sort, I think. But they have it, and they have managed it rather beautifully here. Really, they have really turned it around. It's a massive spin. It's like if you look at it from outside Finland, it looks really crazy, but they have managed to pull it off with this nation, most unfortunately.
But the what we have seen during Corona were successive messaging by the
Yeah.
media that went from one argument to another, and the other argument then actually contradicts the first one, right? The first, I
Mm.
mean, most important, of course, that if you get a vaccine, then you're safe. And
Yeah.
that had to go all the way to, oh, you have to get a vaccine once every 6 months or once every 12,
Mm.
12 months
Mm.
in order to be marginally less likely to go to the hospital. Right?
Yeah.
That's what it
Yeah. Yeah.
transformed
Yeah. Yeah.
into.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it went
Yeah.
into in steps, right? And it
Yeah.
seems to me that again, like now we're at a point where we went from in NATO, you are safe, down to only a few of us will go and die in a war with Russia. Is it that
Yeah.
slope?
Yeah. It is. It is. But I think the biggest spin here has been how weird how Russians are treated, like Finnish Russians, double citizens here.
Mm.
There was an actual point when there were some beatings of Russian people even in Helsinki from the anger. So they have what they have created with this propaganda and lies is such a massive hatred towards Russians first, and now just Kremlin or the leadership of Russia, that all reason goes out. So, like since Corona, at least they appeal to the primitive instinct feelings, and people, unfortunately, most unfortunately, we're still such an underdeveloped species that we let feelings dictate what we do and how we act. So that has been the key here, especially here, but in all over the Western world, basically.
Yeah, I mean, Russophobia is on an all-time high. It's there's nothing more popular right now than to hate on Russia. It's beyond criticism, because one of the problems we have at the moment is that certain sectors, especially of left liberal wing, cannot distinguish anymore between criticism and hate. They
Yeah,
equate both of them.
yeah,
But
yeah.
what we are seeing in the West is like really like outright hatred for all things and anything Russian. But the big difference between Ukraine and Finland, because I had this question recently, why is Russia not worried about Finland? The big difference is that there's no border disputes, and Finland actually has no open kind of mini warfare about Russian-speaking minorities. I mean, there are Russians and Russian speakers in Finland, but they are overall pretty integrated, right, in Finland. So
Yeah.
is there a new internal problem opening up with this division?
No, no, absolutely not. But I just heard few divorces where the Russian and Finnish couples couldn't get along because the other side believes the propaganda here and the other side believes the propaganda of Kremlin, and then they separate. But I don't. That was a passing moment basically, and the Finns are quite like rational people what comes to when you concerning your surroundings. And there's a lot of like Russian speaking people, and now there are also people from Ukraine, and we honestly cannot. There are two different languages, but we cannot tell the difference. So it has become normalized in that sense again, and then, but there is a people are acting very like schizophrenic in that. Some people, older people, for example, is that they think that Russians here are good, but Russians there in Russia are bad. And then the assumption that no, it's like, I just had a discussion with a relative a week ago that I said that they really cannot change the leadership. Well, then you have to accept the consequences of that. Like what? Like Russia has been under different kinds of dictators for 500 years. So that's the culture, and the younger like entrepreneurs in this place I go, Russian-born entrepreneurs, many of them tell me that Russia is not ready for an actual democracy yet. It takes another generation after the Soviet Union and all that, so it takes time. And this is kind of baffling answer, but when they explain it, I'm like, okay, it makes perfect sense. So not every country is ready for a clear democratic process, but what we should be looking at here is the consistency of the message. And unfortunately, I have to say that the message of Kremlin is much more consistent than what we get from the West, which is really chaotic.
Can you maybe expand on that? Which part of the messaging do you think is consistent?
Well, the American scholars, most notably Jeffrey Sachs and Jeffrey Mearsheimer, have been reporting that, like, Moscow has been making clear since early 2000s that Ukraine is the red line. There is even reportedly there was an article in, was it Pravda or TASS or one of the Russian newspapers, that in 2008, when Presidents Putin and George W. Bush met, Putin would have said to President Bush that if Ukraine ever tries to join NATO, the country will cease to exist. So it has been consistent that Ukraine is the last line of defense what comes to the security structure sought by Kremlin. And they have been very consistent on that message that this is what we cannot take. They have been flexible with the Baltics and even Georgia in a sense, and all the former Soviet states. But Ukraine was the red line, and they, of course, there is like imperialistic aspirations in Russia. There always is, like in every single empire. Even in Hungary, there are still people who think that the, Hungary-Austrian Empire should have not been broken down. All that. When you have an empire, the imperialistic mood takes a long time to go. Just look at the UK. They think they're still a superpower, but they're not. So anyway, so these are these things. But the concept of security, which Finland has been an integral part, has been the same for Russia for, well, I don't know, 500 years, a long time. Because most of the attacks or the existential like threats in Russian historical writing, they have come from Poland and Ukraine, and then a few times, maybe one time in the Nordics. Those are the directions of threat to Russia coming from here.
As in way to attack Russia, right? As in
like
geographical areas to go through.
Yeah, Napoleon, Hitler all went through Ukraine and Poland to Russia. And there was like the Poles and Russians had their own thing, own skirmish in the 1800s, and then there was the Sweden-Russian War and all that, which was fought mostly in the Karelian Peninsula and all these things. But this what I mean by the consistency. At the Kremlin, Moscow is seeking the security structure. It's called the PSYOP, not so something. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's a concept on absence of threat. And Finland currently, I don't think Moscow really sees as a threat at this point, because we are very far from the point where the young men of Finland, the young Finnish guys, would be willing to pick up a gun and go to the Eastern Front, because they do not see the threat. But this propaganda has had mostly effect on the older generations, which are not going to go to war, and they have the mothers and fathers who have went to war. So I'm kind of it's really interesting to to see that how they react like this. And we have seen the Russian aggressions, other wars all over. So it's a strange thing, but at current time, I'm not seeing such signals that young men would be willing to go to fight a war against Russia because they see absolutely no point there. So we would need to see some massive escalation, a false flag or something like that. Because when they were basically my last times when I spoke about this in Finnish in Finland and during the summer and early fall, which led to the defamation pieces. After those pieces were published, there was a lot of like young dudes who came up to me in Helsinki and thanking me that I'm speaking about these things. They have absolutely no interest of going into a war.
True. But we see that also in Ukraine, how people have to be dragged off the street in order to be sent into war, right? And we know also about Ukraine that even shortly before, February 2022, a majority of people was not in favor at all to fight a war, and there was a large majority that actually wanted a de-escalation with Russia, but that was overwritten. So, and the way it worked there is then, of course, by creating a basically, which is why I still think Russia shouldn't have gone all the way it went in 2022, is like making sure that it is the Russians that cross the border, right, and not the Ukrainians. Now, Finland, I believe, is also still far away from a point where a foreign power would have that much power over Finland in order to instigate. But there are now 15 or 17 US bases on Finnish soil. I mean, is it possible that these US bases alone might suffice to cause the Russian policy to counter threat from Finland, not necessarily Finnish threat, but threat emanating from the Finnish territory, that would then lead to more militarization in Finland?
Well, yeah, it's possible, and I think the biggest risk of the DCA, it's the defensive cooperation agreement with our deranged government with the United States, is that it gives a massive leverage to our political system. And an American researcher explained to me, I think maybe 6 months ago, about this, and he asked me, do I understand that when the DCA is signed and you have the US bases in your country, US will dominate your political system? I said, well, I had my doubts, but I didn't know. He said that will happen.
How?
Well, I think it operates in multitude of levels, but the key is the leverage. Like they are US troops on our soil, and the comments or the arguments of what we should do, communicated mostly through back channels, they really affect our politicians and even the media in a different way when we have US troops here. So when there's a communique from Washington to our government, or let's say to our editors, some general or spokesperson or someone calls and says that, these things need to be commented or not commented, it will most likely happen because we have their troops on our soil. It's just how it works. You have leverage, fear basically, and U.S. troops. It's just been something of a lively debate in Finland that what can the U.S. troop actually do here? But leverage comes from the fact that you have troops on your soil. One of the biggest, not the biggest probably anymore, but one of the biggest militaries in the world has bases on your soil. It will affect your policies. We had Russian bases on Finnish soil for quite a time after the wars, and it really affected our political environment. So it comes through leverage. I don't have the exact knowledge how the US, uses its power, but this was the message that your political system will become dominated by the US. And we already see it, like my friend who has served as a high-ranking civil servant during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, 90s even, he told me that like he went through the worst times of Finlandization, where you couldn't be critical of Russia or the Soviet Union, and our press was allegedly, in fact, in most parts of it were under Russian control, and the culture how we could speak here was also under the influence of Kremlin. And he told me that it was not this bad even back then. So it's worse now. And it's difficult to put your finger on it. Like these are the things that are happening, but you feel it here. You feel a change in the mood.
And
now, as we're going towards Trump's presidency, it looks good in a way that. In a way that there's an actual notion there that this is taken, but okay, these things happen. But so it looks good in a way that it's unlikely that anything oppressive will come from the Trump administration to Finland. But if someone else would be coming to power, with the strong agenda against Russia, I think we would see it here rather quickly. But what comes to the, I'm not sure did we go through this earlier, but what comes to the actual military policy of Kremlin towards Finland and the Nordics, President Putin has already showed us, the whole Nordics, how the Nordic problem will be handled if there's a war between Russia and NATO. And there have been two simulated nuclear bombing runs to Stockholm. Did we speak about this?
No. Can you explain that? When was that? What are you talking about?
2013 and 2022 end of March, and at least the first, was the second one they had. So there was like a formation of like 4 fighter jets and 2 bombers. And they flew they simulated a bombing run to Stockholm, and they went like 50 kilometers inside the territorial waters of Sweden before they could scramble the what are jets? The Swedish jets and the intercept.
Saab.
Saab, and they did it in 2013 and now again. And then after the Ukraine war started, the second bombing run was in end of March 22. And I heard from my friend who has connections to the intelligence community in the Nordics, there was a strong rumor that Russia is going to invade Gotland, which is the small island in the middle of the Baltic Sea. So if you nuke Stockholm, take Gotland. Stockholm is the capital of the Nordics. If you decapitate it, it will kill the spirit. Then you take Gotland, and then you control the Baltic Sea, and Finland receives 70-80% of everything that we needs to come here to the sea through the Baltic Sea. You create a situation where you force Finland to negotiate, because we cannot sustain our society and economy for long without if the travel to or the commerce through the Baltic Sea is cut, and you force Finland to negotiate. And possibly now, nuking Stockholm would be accompanied by either tactical or nuclear strikes of the tactical kind with the low yield warheads, or then with the Oresnik on Finnish targets. I've calculated there is maybe a dozen targets in Finland that if they are hit with tactical nukes or Oresniks, if the system is really so destructive as Kremlin tells us, you will basically decapitate Finland, the ability to function properly. And then the options would be just go to a really batshit crazy open warfare against Russia with limited reserves, like we have maybe 4 to 5 months of ammunition, for example, or negotiate. So it's nuking Stockholm, taking Gotland, forcing Finland to negotiate. It's kind of a checkmate.
I mean, but these are all like horrible worst case scenarios, and these are all like, this is exactly what NATO is supposed to prevent from ever happening, right? But how is it that these discussions are happening now? How is it that in these newspapers publish so much about the inevitability of this war when during neutrality Finland was actually quite safe, wasn't it? I mean, even though there was all of this Finlandization and Russian influence, and you couldn't have a really open process on everything, and the role of Urho Kekkonen is a controversial one, but there was a sense of safety as far as I know from the sources that I read, from the historical sources I read.
Yeah, well, the only reason I can think of is that there is a plan in the leadership of the deep state of NATO to go to a war against Russia. That's the only explanation. Why would you try to weaponize the populace of a major country bordering Russia to a war against Russia? I don't see any other point than there is an aim to bring upon a war with NATO and Russia, and we would of course be on the forefront country. And you know, this I have to mention, when our new president Alexander Stubb came to power, he actually said that we Finns now have to acknowledge that we are a forefront country against Russia. He actually said this.
When was that?
Well, when he, year and a half ago, was it? Or when he came to power? This was his first. No, it was past year. Yeah. About when it. Sorry, I have forgotten when our presidential elections are, but they're in the spring time. So he came to power in somewhere during the spring. But anyway, this is what he said.
The other way.
And I have to add this too. He said this, and then he signed a defense contract, an agreement with Ukraine. A defense agreement with Ukraine. Can you imagine it? That's the last time our president signed a treaty, defense treaty, with the country in a war against Russia was in 1944, when we were about to lose everything. It was Risto Ryti then, and Adolf Hitler did make this pact, and now Volodymyr Zelensky, Alexander Stubb. That's the craziest thing. And even my neutral, peace-loving, not critical friends started writing me that how can president do these things? And that question has been completely unanswered. And the fact is that I asked about this from a constitutional law office, that is this a treason? And they told me that if this leads to a military conflict with Russia, this treaty or this pact, it's hard to see it as not being a treason, a high treason. So these are these really strange things that in no way do they help or make Finland safer. NATO, well, we were promised that it would. DCA, definitely not. And then our politicians acting like this, and our media waging this war, a media war against Russian leadership. So, if it's the only reason I can think of that there's a plan in NATO to go to war against Russia.
Yes, or it is a case of another mass hysteria, mass formation event where you have just enough people who believe enough that there is a threat from Russia, that Russia is inevitably going to invade Finland. I mean, is this talk about Russia's threat to Finland, does that accompany these articles? Or is the Russian threat kind of a sideshow? Is it like a given, or are there articles on that Russia will invade? Because that's the only way you could make it make sense.
Well, they're like this. I haven't seen invasion term used, but the threat is being created. But if you look around a Finnish society, really few actually believe that. But there is this strange, I lost the word, but a kind of saddened realization, a fact that many people see that no, the war will come. So they
not
don't
necessarily
see
Russia, but the war.
No, with Russia, yeah, the inevitability of the war is weighing on people. Like, it's coming. They cannot stop it. They don't want it, but it comes. And some say it's because Russia acts like that, and a few percentage of people say because we do this and we do that. But there is this melancholic thinking that war will come, and it's not good. But it tells you that the idea has been brought from outside. Like when there was the Georgian War, for example, there was a war. That's it. And when there was the first the Ukraine-Russia conflict started in 2014, it was like, okay, there was a talk about that this is not a good thing, but nothing major. Everybody was, no, this is fine, doesn't concern us. And now it has been spun around in a way that we're actually a forefront country in this.
A frontline
so
country.
Something is different this time around.
Is there anything in your view that Russia could do to actually kind of put the Finnish populace at ease? Is there anything that you think Russia could do in public diplomacy terms to reassure the Finns that they are not a natural target to them?
Well, they are doing it all the time. Finnish it's not a talking point. I have some contacts to Russia, and there's like zero hostilities towards the Finnish populace among Russians. Of course, some, and basically almost the same applies now. There was a dark period, but almost the same is the situation. Almost the same here. There is no actual aggression between our two, populations. This is a problem of the political leaders. But Kremlin I think they are doing well. They're acting correctly. There is no talk of Finland being a threat. They're just saying that the problem is the U.S. bases, and they will react accordingly. We have to adjust our missile targets and these things, and that's about it. The feeling of threat, actually, it comes from the side of NATO, basically, here, and the media. and that's it. But like I said, it looks like a grooming process. And if I would watch Finnish media every day, it would probably not drive me insane, but it would infuriate me. It's currently just make to break you. It's really horrible.
That is very scary. That is very
Yeah.
scary. Um, I do hope there's a way to escape this because there is in IR this famous self-fulfilling prophecies, right? If you if you tout long enough that the X is gonna happen, then you will do yourself what's necessary in order to for X to actually occur.
Yeah.
And it seems as if though Finland is being ground through that process. But
Mm.
so how, because you said that there's also the population or the generation gap, and that is really the middle generation that is most influenceable by this.
Mm.
Um, what do you see with the students and so on, and younger generations like 20 and or 25 and below, of how they interact with media? Because my observation is that the most critical minds are the same. It's like the 65 plus
Mm.
and the minus 24 and less. They
Mm.
th there's a difference in how they perceive world events. The middle part is a problem.
Yeah, you're probably right. It's just yeah, I don't teach at the time, so
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening with the students, but the youth I see and spoke with is yeah, they acquire the information from different channels mostly, and it's really the older generations that are falling into this trap. Some of my generation X's too, but it's mostly the boomers and some of the X's who are really into this. And millennials are generally a mess, which are now over 30. But I just don't. You don't get the urgency of threat, but they are trying to create it. It's just yeah. So that's really how it is. But it's the there was an interesting. This goes a bit further now, but there is when I was just like I mentioned you just before we started, I was skimming through the Finnish media to what's in there, and there was this report of Elon Musk commenting a Finnish, well, can't really describe him anything else but a troll, Joni Askola, when Musk had said that FIU.
Yeah.
So retard, and it was about how Musk has the Joni's comment was about how Musk has become this spreader of misinformation, and the EU must act. And they, well, all of us who use social media or even the regular media to try to criticize or steer things in a way that would lead to people becoming more critical on the current political process. We face a lot of like anger and defamation and insults, and sometimes your feelings just get the best of you because we're all just humans. And this is probably why Musk replied like he did. But the other part of the story in Finland is the massive defamation and NAFO operations. NAFO, I mean what there's actual it's a short from an actual, it's a NATO, it's not well anyway, a NAFO, people who are attacking those who they see as pro-Kremlin in the social media, basically. So there's been a very dramatic increase in those attacks towards me, for example, but also Finnish media is targeting citizens of Finland for any like sympathies towards Russia. They tried to make us as we were paid by Kremlin, we would take orders from them, or we would just sympathize them. And this is something that has never been this bad. Like, I gave 3 interviews during the late summer, early fall, where I argued for the need to establish this renew this agreement of cooperation, coexistence, and I don't remember all. It's the YYA in Finnish. So this was an agreement made between Soviet Union and Finland that basically said that so if there would be an attack to Russia through Finland would it was mentioned Germany at the time. Finland would repel those attacks, and then they would negotiate if they would take help from the Soviet Union. And so I raised that the east tensions, which NATO and the DC are bringing, we would need this agreement renewed, where Finland would be, we would make clear that we would agree that we do not let any foreign force attack Russia through Finland. Like, it would be the neutrality within NATO. And it was attacked heavily, both in the social media and also in the mainstream media. And it also gave me a hint that this is something that they're actually planning down the line, that there would be this war and even an attack maybe through Finland to Russia. So I understood. I was completely aware what kind of storm it would bring. And it also showed that our media really don't want to understand the change in my thinking, for example. So I gave lengthy interviews to Helsingin Sanomat, to Iltalehti, to Ilta-Sanomat, all the biggest like daily newspapers, and they all turned into these defamation pieces.
Yeah, because they don't quote you at length. They just pick out the pieces that they want in order to paint the picture of you, right?
Yeah, and the journalists were great, but the editors, they changed and they really tried to make me as a that I was taking money from Kremlin or being the Kremlin's troll or anything. The logic behind, or the change in my thinking, for example, when the war in Ukraine started, I honestly was wholeheartedly supporting Ukraine. And then when I started to understand what was going on in Ukraine, I changed my view. And this logic, they don't want this logic to come out. They just want people to feel. And now, again, a lengthy introduction. Funnily yesterday, I saw an interview of a rather famous, of course I forgot his name, rather famous Russian journalist from 2015. And he said that in 2025, there will be a war in Europe, in Ukraine. And he said that when that's done, it will start again in Belarus, then in the Baltic states, then possibly in the Nordics. And this led me to think that if there is a NATO deep state really pushing for this war, like I think there is, and Trump manages peace in Ukraine, the escalation will not stop there. And one reason why Finns are groomed to the war against Russia is that at some point they may decide that maybe a false flag is needed here to start a conflict with Russia in the north. This is simply something we have to acknowledge. And watching everything that is going on here, there is not really no other word for it than a preparation for a war. And we need to ask, why is it happening? And I think Finland is part of the continuation of the conflict in Ukraine. if they get it settled, it will flame up somewhere else, not immediately, but it will continue, because that seems to be the aim. And we should be very worried on the aspirations or the aims of the NATO deep state. Very worried.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I wish I could add anything more positive. I do hope that there will be responsible national leaders who understand that the greatest responsibility is actually to prevent war and not to ready everybody to win a war, but to not fight any war. But we will talk about this again, and if things come up, please let me know. Tuomas, people should best find you on Twitter, I suppose, on X.
X, and I have a newsletter in Substack.
Okay. Substack,
yeah.
Tuomas Malinen, and Twitter X, Tuomas Malinen. The links will be in the description, everybody. Tuomas, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.